Thanks. Look, let me first thank Julian. Might not seem like a lot of work, but actually organizing these events take quite a lot of time. And also let me join Julian in saying thank you to our hosts as well. What I want to do today is to some extent share some of my, what Julian talked about, the research I've done over the last, well, I was going to say nearly 2 decades, but actually it's more than 2 decades now, on auction and market design. But I guess kind of something that's slightly different from standard academics. I actually have had a very extensive industry experience in actual design, right? And so, markets range from electricity to gas, to infrastructure, ports, rail, and so on, but also some very interesting markets, for instance, dairy, which might not come across as maybe a very exciting field for market design, but there you go. I've worked on market design issues for the dairy industry. And this work was not only in Australia, but and in the region, New Zealand, but also in Asia, in Europe, in the US, and of course in Latin America. So what I'm planning to do today is to give you a overview of the theory, okay? Because everything we do is essentially based on some theoretical principles, right? Give you a sense of what the conceptual framework is, and then I will go through some examples. And then I have a couple of case studies as well. Okay, so we'll see how it goes for time. So in terms of, let me start out by saying that the debate about contracting out and competitive tendering was really played out in the 1990s, and I don't really want to revisit that today. Okay, so if you dislike that idea, I just ask you to kind of forgive me and be patient for the next next hour or so. Today is really about the micro issues, really, how you design, right? And so, we've made these decisions about introducing competition in, say, electricity generation, right? Introduce competition in gas production, but also introducing competition in health and many other sectors of the economy. Today, I'm not going to argue that that's what we should have done or not. Instead, I'm going to go through is how we do it, okay? Now, I'm going to make a very simple distinction between 2 types of mechanisms or market mechanisms. One is mechanisms where you use prices. So these are auction standards. Think of market mechanisms where you match buyers and sellers, and then they trade at some price. Okay, right? This is things that we design. Okay, but then there's a whole heap of other mechanisms where, for ethical reasons or other considerations, we don't really use prices or money, okay? And then I'm talking about matching, for instance, organ donors to recipients, students to schools, and children to child care centers, right? For the young parents here, they know what I'm talking about. All these are markets where, for one reason or another, don't want to charge people for those matching, right? So we need to find another criteria to allocate, say, to match organ donors to organ recipients and so on. And in fact, this was the subject of the 2012 Nobel Prize, which was awarded to Al Roth and to Lord Shapley. And if I have time at the end, I'll cover some of that material as well. And so start with this idea of what kind of markets we design. Okay, so what types of markets? Why do we need to design markets in the first place? Okay, and then I'll talk about the aims of design market. Okay? And when I explain, you're going to hopefully understand what I'm trying to get at, how complicated the trade-offs are. Then I'll move into the theoretical foundations. I'll talk about 5 minutes or 10 minutes about game theory, auction theory, and mechanism design, give you some key insights, and then I'll go through 2 leading examples. This one I had a very minor role in setting this up. Was a very large experiment, if you like, with 220 million people to avoid rationing of electricity, and was by economic criteria was very, very successful. Okay, and I'll go through that, and hopefully, if you have time, I'll go through the Nobel Prize, the 2012 Nobel Prize Economics, and talk about kidney exchanges. Okay, again, if I have time. Now, I'll see if is the internet.
We think so.
Okay, we think so. There's the mouse. Oh, no mouse. Okay.
We think not.
Okay, so much for the. All right, okay.
Could you help, or is it going to take too long?
No, forget it. Look, are they going to have access to the slides? These people are going to be able to.
Yes.
Yeah. So we copy and paste the URL and just watch and have a laugh because you will. It's a kind of funny. It sets the scene though, but nevertheless. I won't say anything else. I'll let you watch later tonight. All right, now talk about types of market mechanisms. Of course, auctions for the allocation of public resources. So we're talking about the spectrum of frequency for mobile telephony. I mean, we just had the auction of the spectrum frequency that was freed up by switching from analog TV to digital TV. We had a bunch of spectrum there that was essentially freed up, and the government then used a well-designed auction by a former colleague from Maryland who is known as a clock auction, and the government raised about $2 billion. But using auctions in Australia to allocate the spectrum is not really new. They started using it in late 1990s for the 2G, for the PCS auctions in late 1990s. But also, don't only think about auctions of spectrum frequency, but say, or just actually finish a job on auction design or market design for the allocation of exploration licenses for oil and gas. Okay? At the moment, the mechanism that is used to allocate licenses for oil and gas is what we call beauty contest. Sounds kind of exciting, but it's not. What it is essentially companies submit the bids, but those bids essentially constitute some promises of how much they're going to invest in exploration. So in the case of oil and gas, exploration might be the number of holes they're going to drill and the intensity of the drilling. Okay. Now we think that this type of competition creates is socially wasteful. Okay, because people tend to promise too much, and so instead it was part of the legislation but not really implemented. The government decided to implement that. Now they're going to use an auction mechanism to allocate exploration licenses for oil and gas in mature areas. Okay, and so think of any public resource can be allocated to an auction. But also, if you think about the flip side of the auction, is essentially a tender. So an auction typically allocates the object for sale to the bid of the highest bid. Correct? A tender allocates the contract or to the supplier with the lowest bid. The economics of it is completely symmetric. Okay, so a tender is simply an auction upside down. Okay, and so the analysis we do for auctions is the same as the analysis we do for tendering. And of course, government procurement. I don't need to stress how big a deal it is, right? And countries have moved to electronic types of procurement formats, and that, say, in developing countries, that has, where this is essentially you have a software, we have the system where you submit bids electronically, but it's transparent, so you can see immediately the advantages in terms of not only lowering the cost to the government, but also eliminating corruption, or at least make it harder for corruption to occur. So these have been, again, government procurement around the planet has been impacted by auction design principles. Typically, at least when talking to talking to students, they think that only governments use auctions, right, and tendering, but that's of course not true. Think of a large mining company. They might buy $1 billion worth of goods and services. Don't you think they're going to use their buying power to get a better deal? Of course they will, right? And therefore they also use tendering type mechanisms. Now, another reason for another type of market that we design are markets that solve complex problems, okay? Now, think I've talked about electricity, right? Well, we, in the 1990s, decided to create a wholesale electricity market, right? Which is actually the only energy market in the whole planet, right? And I actually think it works well, but most people disagree. Now, what's the peculiarity about electricity? Well, the peculiarity is that supply and demand needs to be balanced all the time, right? Okay. If supply and demand are not balanced, you're in trouble, right? And so you need an auction, you need a mechanism to take that into account. Now, one that I think is quite neat is, think about Google searches, okay? When you do a Google search and you say, whatever you want to search, you see some ads immediately as you get the search results and you get ads, correct? Unless you search for something completely obscure, then you don't get any ads. But if you search for something reasonably popular, you get a list of ads. Now, how do you know? How do you think those ads come up? Why did they come up? It's an auction actually that takes microseconds to be resolved. Bidders then, people who want to advertise Google, they submit those bids beforehand, right? And they say, look, if the award auction comes up, I'm willing to pay $100. If the word auction Flavio comes up, I'm willing to pay $200, right? People submit bids, and this auction mechanism actually solves the problem in microseconds and releases the information. So, you can see kind of how an auction mechanism can solve complex problems, right, and quickly. Okay. Incidentally, Google, Yahoo, so Google's chief economist is Hal Varian, who is actually not so much an auction theorist, but a microeconomist who specializes in pricing. Right? And Microsoft hired Susan 82 as a chief economist. Lots of auction theorists have been hired by Preston. Actually, Preston McPhee works for Yahoo. So all these search engines actually have chief economists who are auction theorists. And the reason is most of the revenue comes from the auctions, right? All right, but there are also non-pricing and matching mechanisms, as I described, matching children to daycare centers. The Victorian government now has a pilot trying to look at how they can do that, how they can design a market that doesn't involve payments to match children to daycare centers. Matching doctors or medical doctors to hospitals, that's another kind of example, right? So again, these are examples of markets that do not involve prices. Right. Now, when do we design markets? Well, first when, say you buy a nuclear submarine, right? What do you do? I mean, do you go to the supermarket or hard, right? Hopefully, only governments can buy nuclear submarines, hopefully, right? And say if you're a US manufacturer, only the US government can buy the submarine that you are producing, right? And therefore, almost by definition, that becomes a market design problem because there's no market, right? And so the government, the buyer, often has to set the parameters for that purchase to occur, right? And that's really what I'm talking about. Treasury bills, we now take it as for granted, but there was no secondary market for, when we start issuing treasury, we want to create markets, secondary markets, and actually governments, and this has happened in Australia, but also around the planet, they actually kickstart secondary markets for treasury bills because they value the liquidity that those markets created. Again, initially they were designed, okay? And then they evolved over time. But also perishable goods, right? I mentioned electricity. Supply and demand needs to be balanced all the time. But how about flowers, right? Fresh flowers, right? Has anyone gone to Holland and see one of those gigantic warehouses where they sell flowers? I'm sure there's a video on YouTube that you can find. It's really worthwhile visiting. It's a gigantic warehouse, and they, if you're a wholesaler, you buy, so you go there, you buy flowers, and you bring them to Australia. That's essentially what you do, right? By plane, okay? Now, they use a particular type of auction. So it's called the Dutch auction, very original name. It's essentially a clock auction. It starts at a high price. The price goes down until someone stops the clock. The person who stops the clock pays the price that is displaying at the clock, okay? Now, do you know what happens if the price goes, usually there's a reserve price. So if the price goes below that, the lot of flowers is not sold. And do you know what happens to that lot of flowers? Destroyed. In fact, it's destroyed in a very graphic, very dramatic way. Okay? And now, can you see why? I mean, that's a really, if you get that, then it's a very insightful into market design. Can you see why they have to destroy the flowers? And I mean, forget the drama, they could just destroy it. But anyway, can you see why they have to destroy the flowers? Sure, right? Because if they were sending back to the market later in that day, they're going to undermine their sales anyway. People are going to wait to buy later, and the price will drop, okay? And so they actually have to do that. And so this gives you an insight on how, how all these different parts of not only the auction format, but actually destroying the flowers, how these things fit together. Incidentally, fresh fish, has been sold through auctions forever, right? Okay, and every culture, in southern France, in Japan, you find ironic, but one country where auctions are very, very popular was China. And auctions back to 400 BC are being reported in China, okay, in southern China. And so in particular to sell fish, fresh fish, auctions are also useful. Auctions can be used to improve access or to reduce the cost to government. Does anyone here have heard of the bush auctions in Victoria? The bush auctions? No? Okay. Bush auctions, this is in 2001, I think. In Victoria, as we do here, the Victorian government makes payments to farmers, okay, so that the farmers can undertake particular actions to improve the environment. That might be removing weeds, that might be looking after some habitat, that might be putting some fencing, okay, some fence around particular areas. And those payments were fixed, okay? 2001, we convinced the Victorian government to try to use an auction, okay? Where farmers would put in a bid for how much they're willing to bid, to receive, right? To undertake particular actions, okay? And you think, well, it's hard to sell to farmers, you know. Anyway, it was a huge success. Everyone got into it. There's a lot of training, a lot of consultation. It was really well done, right? I mean, an example of how it should be done, except for the very last day when this was early days and they had a computer with all the data and the cleaners came overnight and knocked the power off. But we won't go there. That was a bit of a drama, but they managed to get there. So there was a few minutes when the market wasn't actually alive, but everyone took it in good spirit and it was fine. But nevertheless, the point is that if you look at the results of the auctions, the government, and by that I mean society, got 7 times more environmental, whatever, protection, whatever you want to call it, environmental action than a fixed price. Okay, 7 times more, right? That gives you a sense of, of the power of these mechanisms. And again, more broadly, design markets to match buyers and sellers. So eBay what's eBay? Really is an auction platform, right? Okay. Stock market, same. Okay, it's really a platform. And as I mentioned before, to use options to solve complex problems. I'll go to this reasonably quickly, but that, again, as part of my my professional life, often we as a designer, given these are the government objectives, right? And usually there's like a 50, you work hard to get that down to about 5, 6, right? And then work even harder to get them to give you some trade-offs, right? Because there are trade-offs, right? But these are sort of a shopping list of, over time, of the kind of things that I've been told that the market that we were designing had to do. Number one, of course, is to allocate the object to the highest value, the bid of the highest value, or the contract to the supply of the lowest cost for a given quality. But also, transparency and fairness, that's a big deal, right? So, we need to understand the rules, and the rules need to be fair. We have to come across a good definition of fairness, but I'm happy to mention that that's an objective. Often, that's predicate. That's kind of there's a even for governments there is a wish of maximizing revenue if they're allocating a resource, or if they're buying something to minimize the costs of buying. To avoid collusion, in developing countries, this is a big deal to minimize corruption. Okay, so the example I gave before of having online auction for things like toilet paper, stationery, right? Actually cut down corruption, eliminated corruption essentially, because it's so transparent that's it made it simply impossible for corruption, at least in this case where the products are reasonably homogeneous. It's virtually impossible for corruption to occur. But there are also often many other objectives. Industry participation is one. Often, we need to get industry on board. Something else that has been described as sustainable competition. So that's some vague idea about dynamic efficiency, right? And then I often point out, there's a trade-off, okay? The example I give is a not so hypothetical example of, say, a large company who is standing for, say, the supply of some specialized engineering service, okay? This might be a mining company, might be. Now, there are only 3 firms that can provide that service, okay? Very specialized service. Now, the new CEO got an auction designer to design a tender process that would really lower the cost of the services, right? And the auction designer did a good job of designing an auction that would, a tender that would actually get that cost the lowest possible. Okay, really good job. Now, what would be a consequence of that? Well, that you'd go from 3 firms to 1. And so 5 years down the track, mind you, the CEO's executive compensation probably wasn't 5 years ahead of time, but anyway, so for the CEO it was probably optimal, but not for the shareholders, right? Because 5 years down the track, then you have the mining company, the company, was then facing a single supplier, okay? And that changed the dynamics completely, right? I mean, there's no tender that you can design that's going to give you competition if there's only a single potential supply, right? And so that's really the trade-off between static efficiency or revenue and dynamic efficiency. And as I said, often these are conflicting objectives, and you are lucky if you get some sense of what well, if you had to choose, which one is the number one, right? And often when you pretty pressure, at least governments, they would say number one would be static efficiency. Okay? But you really have to press hard for them to do that. Now let me briefly talk about theoretical foundations. Ironically, kind of market design emerged somewhat differently or separately from game theory. Okay? But game theory provides really the foundations for looking at non-cooperative behavior. What do I mean by non-cooperative behavior? Well, the idea that individuals make decisions, when they do that, they're self-interested. Okay? And so often our interests are in conflict. Right? Can you see this is immediately applicable to auctions or tenders or markets, right? If you're a buyer and a seller, right, I want the highest price and you want to pay the lowest price, correct? And so there's a conflict there. And so that's why really game theory, even though mechanism design or market design and game theory kind of evolved a bit separately, they're really linked. Game theory focuses on equilibrium behavior. Again, that's something that, so we try to predict, given a particular market, how buyers and sellers would behave. Okay? And then we can look at how we can improve if the issue is efficiency or revenue or whatever. Okay? Now, key contributions, and I'll be talking about lots of people who got Nobel Prizes, but this one in particular is Hassani, who, by the way, started his career at UQ. I'm not sure if many people know that, but he migrated from Hungary, and his first job, I think, was at UQ. Then he moved to the ANU. Nash, that you all know from the movie, I guess, who is still alive and kicking, possibly literally, and Reinhard Selten. And these guys got the Nobel Prize in 1994 for essentially providing a theoretical framework to analyze equilibria, right? So the idea of that you get some outcome that emerges naturally when people interact in the theory of competitive, non-cooperative game theory. So I'll just go through this. Perhaps if you've done an MBA, is anyone? Oh, it's the people here who teach in the MBA. No, the Prison's Dilemma game, it's the most kind of overused, if you ask me, game. And so I apologize if you have seen these like 1,000 times, but I'll do it one more, 1,001, okay? I mean, the basic idea really is, now these two, the police caught these two guys, two criminals who committed some crime. The police doesn't really have a lot of evidence. Based on the evidence they have, they would only essentially each criminal would get a year in jail, okay? Because the evidence is not so good. Now they get them apart and they try to make them confess to the crime, okay? If they confess the crime, then the actual penalty for the crime that they committed is 3 years, okay? And so, but if you confess, then you are given essentially, you can just walk away, okay? If you confess the crime, right? And so if you try to describe those possible outcomes, I'll use this table here to describe them. And if you think about these two guys, A and B, who commit the crime, if they both, if they don't confess, if they stay silent, the police doesn't have a lot of, the evidence they have is not all that good, so they all go to jail for 1 year, each one of them. Now, if A stays silent and B then confesses to the crime, then A stays silent, but B confesses, and therefore B walks free, and A spends 3 years in jail. So you can get a sense of why the minus sign there, right? It just means it's not a good thing, it's a bad thing. And similarly, if A confesses the crime, but B doesn't, then essentially B goes to jail for 3 years and A walks away. But the problem is that if both confess, then now they go to the judge and they cannot both walk away, and they both get 2 years. Okay, so this is a typical, the sort of standard story. What's a Nash equilibrium? Nash equilibrium is the idea that when I make my choice, so the choice that I make, is essentially, I take into account, I make a choice to sort of, to some extent, to it's the best choice for me, but I take into account that when you make your choice, you're also choosing something that's best for you, if that makes sense. Okay? So when I'll repeat, when I'm choosing what I'm going to do, I choose what I'm going to do, of course, to better my situation, right? So in what's best for me. But when I do that, I assume that what you're going to choose is also, you're going to choose something that's best for you, right? So this is kind of the idea that when you choose something that's best for you, take into account that I choose what's best for me, and vice versa. If you both choose that action, then we don't really want to do anything else, right? We both stick to that, to those choices, okay? So that's really the idea of the Nash equilibrium. And so here, just to illustrate, so let's say if I'm A, I'm thinking, well, if B stays silent, then, well, what happens if B stays silent? Well, if I stay silent, I go to J4E. But if I confess, I walk free. So what would you do? Well, confess, right? Now, if B confesses, then if I stay silent, I go to J for 3 years. If I confess, I only go to J for 2 years. So can you see? Now, for me, of course, I'm always going to confess. And then given the same reasoning for the second player, then he's also going to confess. And then we get stuck into a situation here that's also known as a coordination game, where we have in this bad equilibrium. We would be better off remaining silent, right? But can you see why this cannot be an equilibrium? Because if I say, if the problem here is the following: if B stays silent, what do? I confess, because I get 0 rather than -1, right? So it cannot be an equilibrium, cannot be an Nash equilibrium. That's a very powerful idea, right? And that powerful, and Nash is a mathematician, right? You've again seen the movie, had no connection with economics whatsoever. Okay, from Neumann and Morgenstern Morgenstern was the economist, but they didn't link up to Nash. Right? People didn't link up to Nash initially anyway. They emerged separately. But it turns out that the notion of Nash equilibrium became, from the 1970s onwards, was applied extensively in economics. And then you say, well, if Nash did all that, how come the other two guys got the Nobel Prize? Well, they also did, what they did is, Hassan in particular, extend this idea of Nash, this equilibrium idea that I choose what's best for me, assuming that you choose what's best for you. He extended that to situations where I don't know, you can have different types. I don't know your type. I don't know, for instance, in this context, I don't really know how many, I don't know the jail sentences, for instance, okay? So it sort of extended that to a situation of incomplete information. And what Selton did is extended that to a situation where instead of we making a decision simultaneously, that's, if you think about, that's what the Nash concept is, right? So, oh, but people don't do that. Well, the whole thing is a thought process, okay? So it might have made decisions at different points in time, but we come together and we think through what might happen. But Selton pushed this a bit further and said, look, what if our decisions actually, we make these decisions at different points in time, but when I make my decision, I know what your decision is, okay? Can you see why that's important? Because if I make my decision now, knowing that you're going to make a decision tomorrow, right? I'm, of course, going to take into account that you're going to choose what's best for you, given what I chose, right? And that's going to influence my choice. So it's, it's really kind of the same idea, but extended over time, okay? Now, can you see also the connection to auction theory, right? I'm a seller, right? Or I'm the government. I want to allocate a public resource, an oil exploration license, right? But does the government know, who violates that license the most? Well, if the government did know, we did not need an auction, right? The government would just approach someone and say, look, and we'll negotiate, right? So typically, the government, and even it's the case for private sellers as well, if you're selling a house, for instance, right? If you knew, I'm selling my house, and if I knew how much Julian was willing to pay for my house, well, I have an auction. I was just, and he was the highest, individual with the highest valuation. I would just approach Julian, right? Okay, so, so if you think, going back to the problem of allocating resources, you want to allocate the resource to the individual of the highest value, correct? Correct? But you don't know what the value is. Can you see the problem? And so what you need to do is, and that's where game theory comes handy, is to think about mechanisms where bids are going to be somehow proportional to values, right? And so if an auction, say, allocates the license to the highest bidder, if bids are proportional to values, okay, then that person with the highest bid has the highest value, and the tender of the auction is efficient. So, okay, I'll come back to that in a bit, but that's essentially what the problem of auction design is, and we use games of incomplete information to figure out how individuals would behave in different types of auction formats. Okay, now. Bill Vickrey, who again got the Nobel Prize in 1996, but passed away 3 days after getting the Nobel. And he was a very clever guy, but he came up with this idea of a second prize sealed bid auction, where the bid of the highest bid wins the object, but she pays the second highest bid. So she doesn't pay her bid, she pays the second highest bid. And I don't have a whiteboard here, but in these this type of auction, this type of mechanism, the incentive is for bidders to bid at true values. And I'll just give you a glimpse of why that might be the case, okay? So Vickrey's insight, which he applied to pricing public goods, he applied that in a number of different settings, is the following. The price you pay is essentially, you pay a price that is the value of the person you're displacing, okay? Right? And so what you're doing is you pay a price so if you have the highest valuation, who is that you're displacing? The individual with the second highest valuation, okay? And if you pay a price that's just, so the price you pay is not a bid, it's someone else's bid, then it's for you, we have the incentive to bid your true value, okay? And think about, well, why would I bid more than my value? Well, you don't gain anything by bidding more than your value, and you might lose because there might be someone else with a bid higher than yours, and then you bid above your value, right? And then you lose money. Or if you bid below your value, right? There's a situation where someone might have bid above you and won, but you actually had a higher value. Okay? And because you don't pay your bid anyway, you pay the second lowest bid, you're incentivized to tell the truth. Okay? There are many reasons why Vickrey auctions are not used in practice. For instance, in the context of government contracts, if you design a Vickrey auction, would you bid a tender, if you like? Would you bid your true cost? No, because I'm going to contract you again, in 2016, and thank you very much. I know now your true cost, so I'm going to use that rather than. And so there are lots of practical reasons why people don't use Vickrey auctions. But a lot of the auction design we've done over the last 2 decades really was try to apply Vickrey Vickrey principles to dynamic settings. So we try to get people to somehow bid up to the valuation, right? But we use some tricks, and I'll come to that in a moment. Okay.
And that's one of the ways that eBay works. They use that sort of second price.
eBay is almost like a second price. Yeah, exactly. The same principle, precisely. eBay has some other complications that I could spend an hour here talking through these complications. But yeah, it's essentially eBay is a second price mechanism. All right. So quickly into mechanism design. So if you think of, that's actually it's a history of economic thought lesson here. So if you think of economic theory, and including a lot of auction theory, we try to understand some existing institutions, markets, and then predict behavior, right? Mechanism design, or market design, started with the idea that what are the objectives you want to achieve? You want to achieve an efficient allocation of resources. You want to achieve maximum revenue, okay? And then work out how we get there, okay? How we design the rules, the payments, and the allocation mechanism to get there, okay? That started with, I'm going to mention on the 3 Nobel Prize winners, Leo Hurwitz in the 1960s, but he shared with Roger Myerson from Northwestern and Eric Maskin from Princeton, who this idea of mechanism design. And again, auction theory can be seen as a special case of mechanism design, but also is a field of its own. And so finally, what I want to do is, for the next, so that you wake up a bit, is move on and actually run a couple of auctions here, okay? The first auction that we are going to run is an auction of 10 identical objects. You are going to buy, essentially the idea is that you only want one object, okay? I'm going to sell 10 objects, but you only want one. Now, the value of the object to you is going to be given in a piece of paper, okay? And so what you need to know is that 2 things. One is that the value of your competitors, so I'm going to give you a number, okay? That number is the value that you assign to one of these 10 identical objects, okay? Now, the value of your competitors was generated by a kind of random process whereby any number between 0 and 10 have the same probability, so are equally likely, okay? So your opponents can have any number between 0 and 10 with equal chance, okay? Now, if you win, and I'm going to use now a what's called first price auction, so you pay your bid. So if you win, and if your value, the value that's here is $10, and if you win with a bid of $5, right? And I'll explain the pricing rule in a moment, but say if your value is 10 and the auction price is 5, what's your profit? 5, okay? So I have different colors or papers, because what I'm going to do to save time is actually use 2 types of auction formats, and I'll explain that in a moment. Now, under one action, so for the green people, and I'll do this. You can just don't show it to the person next to you. Thank you. For the green people, we're going to use a pay your bid auction. Okay. In a pay your bid auction, essentially we allocate, and we're selling 5 objects that way. We are going to take the 5 highest bids, okay, and allocate 1 object each to those individuals with the 5 highest bids. But they will pay, they will essentially pay their bids, okay? So in principle, we could have 5 different prices. Does that make sense? Can you pass another one? And you guys want green?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Now I'm also going to use a different auction where it's as a uniform price auction. And the way that auction operates is the following. I'm still going to allocate the object to, oh no, I think I didn't give you a number. So I'm going to allocate to you the object to the individuals with the 5 highest bids, okay? But the difference is, instead of you paying your bid, if you have an orange piece of paper, can you pass that? Thank you. Instead of paying your bid, you're going to pay the 5th highest bid. We're all going to pay the same price. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so I'll repeat. And again, the same, what would be your profit? Well, If your value is 10 and the auction price is 5, your profit is 5. Okay? Very simple. Okay? And so I'll just repeat that. If you have a green, just so there's no confusion, right? If you have a green, green paper, is a pay your bid. So I'm going to select the individuals with the 5 highest bids. They're all going to get one object.
You know, you're saying the opposite of the slide, with regards to green and yellow.
Oh, okay, it doesn't matter. So these guys here, green, are going to be, you're going to pay your bid, okay? And therefore, I'm going to select the 5 highest bids, and you're going to get one object each, and then the price you're going to pay is your bid. Is that clear? And so if you bid $8 and your value is 10, you're going to make $2, correct? Now you guys here, orange or yellow or whatever, we change the colors without harming anyone, hopefully. So you guys here is a uniform price auction. So again, I'm going to select the 5 highest bids. You're all going to get one object each, but you're going to pay, all going to pay one price. The price, the 5th highest bid. Okay? Is that clear? Absolutely clear? Any questions? So, clear? Okay, so can you write down your name and your bid, and I'll go and collect. You can bid as much as you want, but remember that if you bid more than your value, you're going to lose money, right?
But we don't have any idea what the value is.
No, hold on. The value is there. It's in the piece. Oh, you didn't get a value. Oh. Oh, you got blank ones. I'm wondering. You all have values? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no.
Is that white bits of value?
Yeah. Okay. So the number. Okay, guys. Let's just before we do that, the number you received is your value. Okay. Cool. You all got numbers too. Right. Good. So if you can write your name.
Is this GST?
GST. GST free. And then I'll go to J, right?
Sorry, I've got a year to submit. I think your GST.
All right, guys. We need to. It's not a lot of thinking. I do this regularly in teaching, and I had one student once actually took a long time, and he was calculating. And I tell you what, I didn't make any money. Thank you. I'll collect this right. You can just pass your bids so that it'll be easier. Thank you.
That's how much you divide value.
Thank you. Thank you. No bids? Oh, good. Thank you. All right. Now I'm going to collect you guys now bids. Julian, can you sort this out and find the 5 highest? There's some conflict of interest here, but you know, it's, I usually don't do that, but in the interest of time, I'm selling, right? So this is your value, that how much, I'm selling 5 objects, right?
You're selling?
Yeah, I'm selling, right? These are values, so
I shouldn't bid more than this price.
no, yeah, I'm selling, right? Oh, no, it's too late now, Mike. No, sorry, man. Too late. We'll take, so I'm selling 5 objects, right? We sell 5 units, right? Sell. And that is the value that you assign to this particular option, okay? Right? So if you bid more than, you're going to lose money. Can I have your bid? Cool. Can I have your, thank you, guys. Thank you. Now, can I ask any of you to find the top 5, the highest 5 bids? Yes. All right.
I've gotten softer powers. I might need to hear.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you just bid the top,
You just wanted to copy.
Yeah, but then you're going to lose value.
But we have like a uniform. So it's like,
No, but
it's
you
still
still
not high,
really
but
pay the
it's
top.
true.
We only pay the fifth one.
Oh, but that just gives you all the incentives to actually write down what value is.
Yeah, I reckon.
I think his point is that all of you guys are going to have a high average bid.
There is in case other people ask. I don't know what the highest number is though.
Blank doesn't count. It's like. Oh no, there is one, but it's too low. It's too low.
That's low. That's low.
Depends how far it is.
So, three of them. And four of them.
Okay, I'll hold that for you. No, now it's anything above $8. Anything above $8, or below $8.
These are all the ones. Yeah, these are all the bad ones. I think the next one is in
7? Is it 7 or 2?
That's a 2. That's a 2. Which one of these? And 2.
Thank you very much. All right, guys. It was a close call, right? But anyway, look. Can I have your attention? Thank you. So the 5, I'm not going to go to the names, but you know who you are anyway. The range of bids for the pay your bid auction, so you guys, range from $6.51 to $9. Okay? So this is the range. This one, turns out that the 5th lowest bid that we could find, so there might be was $4.06. So the 5 winners here, they paid $4.06, correct? And you guys paid on average, I mean, not on average, you paid anywhere between $6.51 to $9. Now think through the incentives in the different types of auctions, right? Now for the uniform price auction, if you want to win an object, so I mean, if you have a very low valuation, then forget it, right? So that's not really relevant, okay? But say if you had a high valuation, okay, it had a 9. Now, to win one of the 5 objects, who you have to bid? You just have to bid the guy of the 5th highest. So you have to be one of the top 5, right? Okay. And so in this auction, really, you should be bidding closer to your value, right? Okay, if you have a 9, because otherwise you might miss out, correct? Okay. Now think about this one. Now, when are you going to win, right? Again, you have to be one of the highest 5, right? Highest 5 bids to win, right? And so what's the kind of logic that goes behind your decision of how much to bid?
Bid the value of the 5th highest bid.
Try to figure out the value of the 5th highest bid. Do you see the similarity? So because you want to win, that's the same, right? So if effectively the theoretical prediction is that these 2 auctions, in this case, would yield the same price. Okay? Yeah, because you bid, think about it, right? You try to predict the 5th highest guy. Now this guy's bid the true valuation, say, close to the true valuation, but what's going to be the price? 5th highest, okay? And so this is kind of very, again, these things are linked, right? So even though the pricing rule was very different, you all paid a bid, right? The pricing rule here is uniform price, one price. there's a logic that links them, and it's a logic that we explore in auction design quite a great deal. Now, lots of other stuff that we kind of removed from the simple game. But for instance, what if instead of wanting only one object, you want 2 or 3 or 4 objects? Right? Then the whole dynamic would change. Okay? What if in fact, you value 4 objects, winning 4 objects, right? More than 4 times the value of winning 1 object. Okay? So there's some complementarity or some substitution. And so the nature of the evaluations determines how you design the auction as well. Information structure, and I'll have another game soon, but this information structure that you had here was very simple, right? It was almost like a house auction, okay? You kind of, you have some value that maximum value that you're willing to pay for a house that might be determined by how much money you can borrow, right? And that value, some of that value is this resale value that's common, but a big component of it is idiosyncratic, it's private, right? Okay? It's how your family likes the house and so on and so forth, okay? And I mean, so that's a private setting. But there are many other settings where what you're trying to sell actually has a common value. It's just that we don't know what this value is. So the amount of oil under the ground now is there, irrespectively of who wins the auction. Okay, and you're only going to find out after you drill when you get it out, right? And technology is about the same, so firms' costs are very similar, right? They probably use the same subcontractors anyway, regardless of who wins the contract, okay? And therefore, that's a common value. And again, those things will matter, right? But a lot of energy in auction design goes to the micro rules, okay? Reserve prices, we didn't talk about reserve prices, but essentially we use reserve prices to mimic competition. So when there's not enough, when you are not confident as a seller that there's going to be enough competition there, we put a reserve price, okay? And the reserve price is essentially to ensure that you get extra competition, but competition from whom? From yourself, right? Right? You're competing against, you as a seller are competing against the other buyers, okay? That's again important. Pre-qualification, settlement, right? So default rules. So, when I arrived in Australia, just had that cable TV auction, right? I'm not sure if you remember that, 1992 perhaps. And there was the 2 cable TV licenses. They had an auction, which I had nothing to do with, where you could submit as many, so it's a pay your bid auction, but you could submit as many bids as you wanted, okay? And there was no penalty for defaulting, right? And so you can see what happened. I just remember one of them, one of the licenses, I think that the one that Foxtel has, I think the auction price was $177 million. No, so All-Star, the other one. The auction price was 177, and they kind of default. The final price was $77 million, and within a few months, they all sold the license to someone else at a big profit, right? And so really a really bad design. Because they, so what we do, again, I'll give you some insights. Well, typically what you do is, yes, you can default by all means, but you have to pay the difference between, they say in this case, you have to pay the difference between 177 and 77. Now, if you had to pay that difference, you wouldn't default, right? Or you would have bid differently, to be more precise, okay? And so again, this is what some of the insights from modern auction market design. Now let me move to the second experiment, and what I'm going to do is, to be very clear, is I'm selling this wonderful creature here, okay? And the reason this is valuable is because the paper clips, okay? And each paper clip is worth 5 cents. Okay? I'll show you around the film. Some of you might want to kind of estimate. And what I'm going to do is, essentially, I'm going to sell this. The amount of money is actually, so for each paper clip is worth 5 cents. The actual amount of money is here, okay? There's a couple of, few bills there. Now, that's what I'm selling, okay? What I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to get some of you, or actually I'm going to get all of you bidding in a pay your bid auction, okay? So you're going to write down, and I'm going to pass around some piece of paper. You're going to write down, just pass that around. Write down your name and how much you're willing to bid for this, okay? Now, if you win, you don't get the paper clips. You actually get the money. Does that make sense? Okay? So, 5 cents. Each paper clip is 5 cents. Does anyone guys want to look?
Sure.
Well, not remain counting, but anyway, just give you a sense of.
What's the cost of it?
No, you have to pay a bid, so.
You feel? No information at all.
All right. So before you actually write down your name in your bid, you understand, right? So each paper clip 5 cents. Each paper clip 5 cents, right? And they're going to pay your bid. Okay? Pay your bid. And I'll give you the envelope with the money, but I need some cash from you, right? Okay? That's the exchange. Clear? Yeah, no? All right, so if you could write your name, just leave it somewhere. So he's smiling at you there. All right. Okay. Can I get your bids, please? Oh. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, okay. Thanks. Thank you. I take credit cards. I take credit cards, man. No. Okay. Okay. Hold on. Just give me a sec. Okay, so what I'm going to do now. Okay. I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use an English auction, an auction that, where if you bought your house, likely have participated in, and to determine the outcome. So we're going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for bids, for people to bid, and you bid by raising your hand, okay? And then the auction, as in a house auction, will end when no one else is willing to raise the highest standing bid. And then I'll flip a coin to decide if I'm going to allocate the nice pig either using these bids or the result of the English auction. Okay, so I'll start the bid, and to bid is you put a hand up, and I'm essentially going to pick the person who I see first. So start the bid at 5. 10, 10
What's the unit of cents?
bucks, $10. Otherwise you'll be here for a while. $10, 11, 12, 13, $13, $12, $13, $13, $13, $14, $14, 14, $14, $15, $15, $15.50, $15.50, $15.50, $16, 16, okay, 17, $17, 18, 18, $18, okay, 19, 19 bucks, $19, 19 going once, no, not 19, 18 going once, 18 going twice, well, sold, 18 bucks. Congratulations. Okay, the highest, I won't say names, the highest bid in the sealed bid was 50 bucks. Okay, 50 bucks. 5-0. And the highest bid was $18. I'll review now, and is in accountancy, you can count the paper clips. The joke at expensive accounts. 15. Okay. And so what you have observed here is what in this setting, which is a common value setting as described before, is known as the winner's curse. Okay. And what's the idea? Well, the idea is who. We don't know the value of the amount of dollars in that here, right? Is fixed, right? It's the same no matter who wins, correct? Now, who is going to win? The most optimistic person. Okay? Almost by definition, the most optimistic person is going to be what? Higher than the average or the expected value of how much is there. And so that's actually the winner's curse. There's lots of evidence of the winner's curse, and we just experienced today here an example of the winner's curse. Now you think, well, sophisticated bidders would, not for $5, but if you put in $5 million or 10 or 20 or 100, you'd kind of do your due diligence and so on and so forth. But it turns out that there's lots of empirical evidence that of the winner's curse across a whole range of industries, including the oil industry. And so really, again, although, and even if, so my point is, even if you're aware of the winner's curse now, right? Okay? And so if you were to bid, if you were to auction off a different pig, maybe bigger, maybe smaller, then you might have to take that into account, okay? Right? Now, what does that do? That changes the auction price, okay? And so you're going to bid to try to avoid the winner's curse. If I'm selling, what that's going to do to revenue? Decrease revenue, okay? So that has lots of implications, again, for market design, for auction design. And I'll go through some of them now, okay? Now, you ask, well, what's the punchline? Okay, punchline is several. One is, what auction format is best? Well, depends on from what perspective, right? And because the amount, say, if you think about the number of paper clips or the dollars here, essentially, it's a fixed sum, and so it's what we call a zero-sum game. And so what's good for the seller is bad for the buyer, and vice versa, right? Okay? So it's all about sharing the surplus, how we share that surplus, the difference between the buyer's value and the seller's value, okay? Now, the answer to that question, what's best, say, for the buyer, depends on the nature of demand, so where the values are independent, as in the first example, as in the first game we played, or the values are common, right? And so if you think about, again, or it depends on attitudes towards risk. Okay? So what's one risk here in an auction? When you participate in an auction, what's one big risk? Big risk is that you don't win, right? And so if you're really risk averse, what that's going to do? Well, it's going to make you to bid what? More aggressively, right? So that has implications for auction design as well, right? So it's a big risk. Now, another point that it's not that intuitive perhaps, but after this example you might appreciate a bit more, is that revealing information about the value of the object actually in an auction increase the sale price for the reason I just described. If you're not sure and you know the winner's curse, you're going to be very cautious, right? Because you don't know about the value of the object. And so you'll be very cautious, and that's going to have an impact on revenue. So the seller is actually better off revealing information about the value of the object.
Would that be through a reserve price?
Very good question, and in fact there are about 20 papers on that very subject. That's one particular, if the seller cannot commit, in fact I've written one myself, if the seller cannot commit, so say if I'm not credible seller, right? Then what's the only way you can essentially credibly review that's a high value object I'm selling to the reserve price? Because that means that if I set a reserve price and no one buys, I'm happy with that outcome as a seller, right? Now, in many settings, like in the allocation of public resources, that's not the issue. It's mostly, well, should the government then spend money on trying to find out more about how much oil is there to then sell it, right?
That would be a comparative situation where what's it going for North America, what's it going for Saudi Arabia. So there's a comparison for a homogeneous product, I suppose, would be a guide as to what's happening elsewhere in the world market.
Correct. I mean, that's a big component of that as well. So some internet, some for homogeneous goods, if you have some benchmarks, right? Yeah. But often, if you buy a nuclear submarine, right? So if you think about not an auction but a tender, then they're really, because there'll be 5 designs competing, but they're very different things. You don't really know how to compare them. And then again, you have to use the reserve price, but it's the other way around, the ceiling price, strategically, right? Try to kind of get a bit more competition. And also, which is also very important in auction design, is the idea of the linkage principle. And so that is, so in a sealed bid auction, the one you just participated. Now, if you pay your bid, it's a sealed bid, how much you know about the value of other players assigned to the object? Nothing. Only that they're going to be some spread, right? Okay, some range, correct? Right. Now, and then when you bid, to be very clear, the price you pay in that auction does not depend on the information of other bidders. But how about in a second uniform price auction? The price you pay is the 5th highest bid, correct? So the price you pay depends on the information of other people, correct? The values of other people, correct? And so in that case, would you bid more aggressively or less aggressively? You'll be more confident, right, to bid, because you know that the market price is, or the price you pay, is going to depend not only on your piece of information, but the information that you have. Okay? And so that's, again, hopefully I kind of managed to explain that. All right. And finally, what are the key considerations? We talked about efficiency, and if you think about the reserve price as the seller's value for retaining the object, right? Okay? If you set the reserve at that price, right, at that value, if you set the reserve price at that value, then you kind of guarantee efficiency, right? I mean, minimum guarantee of efficiency, okay? But you might be tempted to do what? Put a higher reserve, to make individuals bid more aggressively. And so this is the classic trade-off between more revenue, potentially more revenue, because you might end up not selling the object, right? Potentially more revenue and efficiency, okay? In government, the allocation of public resources by government, the advice always is, well, set the reserve at some kind of benchmark of, right, which will be essentially the value for the seller, the government, to retain that resource today and sell it again in the future, okay? If you want to raise more money, you could. In fact, the optimal auction, which was characterized by that fellow Meyerson, who got the Nobel in 2007, is one effectively, simplest way to describe it is, we can have one where you set a very high reserve. And you take your odds on, because if you set a very high reserve, high value bidders are going to bid more aggressively. A bunch of people with low values will not participate, but I don't care about them, right? I set a high reserve, but the risk is that you don't sell. And so the optimal auction trades off, the optimal auction that maximizes revenue trades off in favor of setting a reserve that's higher than the seller's value. Now, there's also some insights from costly participation. You're bidding for, so to build a hospital, how much it costs to bid? Say $20 million is some numbers that have been floating around, right? And in the context where participation is costly, right, there's some additional insights there too for auction design, okay? And the additional insights essentially say the following. If participation is costly, so I'm talking about now the cost of preparing a bid, okay? Now, who is going to participate? The individuals with, say I'm talking about an auction to sell, the individuals with low value or individuals with high value? Individuals with high value, right? If it's costly to bid, you're not going to participate if you have a low value, okay? Because you have a very small chance of winning anyway, right? But so beauty, if you're a buyer, say beauty, less competition, but is that quite right? Why not? Because those who participate have a high value, and I know that only those who participate are going to have a high value, so they're going to do what? Bid more aggressively, okay? And so there's a real trade-off there as well, okay? There's all other issues, for instance, in the oil. Oh, not talk about oil, let's talk about timber, okay? So some governments, I'll use the Victorian government again as an example, used auctions to allocate the rights to harvest timber from public forests, okay? It was part of a bigger industry intervention to rationalize the industry because of bushfires, and the supply actually of timber went down by 50%. And they had all these processors there that didn't have timber to process, and they had to get a reduction in the numbers, right? And they use an auction, they still do, okay? Now, for the industry, I mean, you could think, well, should we sell the rights to harvest timber from now until 3 decades from now at once, right? Or should we sell them into smaller chunks? Remember the discussion we had in the very beginning? With smaller chunks, what it does is, well, if you sell everything, what I call big bang auction, well, a few firms are going to have these rights. And what's going to happen to the other firms?
Go to business.
Yeah, right? Whereas if you sell them in smaller lots, then you might actually get better long-term outcomes, okay? But how small, right? And so the compromise there was, say, look, we have a 5-year schedule. So that gives the industry some certainty about what's going to be up for sale, what rights are going to be up for sale over the next 5 years, right? And they can plan ahead, okay? They can invest, they have that certainty and so on. So it's a lot that goes into this. And I'm not going to go through the example in Brazil. I'll stop here. I mean, essentially what I did is I went through some real issues in auction design, okay? I gave you some sense of one, that different auctions entail different strategies, okay, and potentially different outcomes, right? That's number one. Second lesson is that every time you design a new auction, you have to look at the details of that particular industry, okay? The principles are the same, but the details matter quite a lot. That's lesson number 3 as well. In the design, details matter quite a lot, right? So if you get the auction format, i.e., for example, the allocation rule and the payment rule right, but you forget about the default rules, right? Your history, okay? If you get, some dimensions right, but you get one dimension wrong, no matter how small, guess what? People take advantage, right? And so really it's about detail, right? So these are really the 3 lessons. Examples, there's a big example, a big sort of experiment, if you like, in Brazil in 2000 with electricity rationing. A market was used to avoid electricity rationing. So they're looking at blackouts and brownouts unplanned that would impact GDP on about 0.5% of GDP, okay? Then they introduced a market for, what they did is they give everyone here, say in this room, households, an entitlement based on 80% of your consumption over the last 3 years. They did a very good job. So if you're elderly, you had sick people at home, they would take that into account as well. You have young kids. Anyway, they did a really good job. So anyway, you got an entitlement which was 80% of your electricity consumption average over the last 3 years, okay? If you went above the entitlement, you paid market prices, which is like 10 times more what the regulated tariff was. The short-run marginal cost, okay, $300. If you went under, you got money back. If you consume less than your entitlement, you got money back in a ratio of 2 to 1, okay? So if your regulated tariff was $10, you got per megawatt hour, you got $20 back, okay? Now, within 6-7 months, electricity consumption, and the same for industries, but industries could trade, okay, the entitlements. Industrial production kept growing. Demand, I don't have time to show the pictures, it's fantastic. Demand went down by 20%, okay? They avoided rationing, one of the great things I take away lessons from that was they surveyed people extensively on what kind of actions they took to reduce consumption, right? And remember, this is in Brazil, not in Australia, so really a lot of poor people, right? For whom, electricity bill was not 5% of the income. It was really more like 20% of the income, okay? It could be 20% with the higher price. Anyway, what happened, what was the most common action that people took to save electricity? Switch the lights off. So that's cost 0, right? Okay, and they avoided a recession. I gave these a couple of several treasuries, both in Australia and overseas, and often there's some politician in the audience, and then his question or her question is, well, what happened to the government? Did they lose the election? Yes, they did. But there you go, But they did the right thing. Anyway, I'll stop here and maybe have time for 1 or 2 quick questions.
Is it best to do a number of models and then compare the models? In other words, the variables that you would have would appear to be the uncertainty, the amount of probability that would be involved. Do you actually do a number of models to determine the one that you would feel would be most applicable?
Yeah, I mean, even though I said a moment ago that each auction design is different, yes, there's a range, maybe 4 or 5 different models that we compare and contrast, and given the characteristics of demand, the structural values, the industry, what you want to achieve, then we use one of them. I mean, in practice, really, I mean, we don't design a new one. The rules about pre-qualification, default, they have to be really kind of fine-tuned to the particular problem, right? But you're right. I mean, there are 4 or 5 models out there in the industry that we use, okay? And we kind of have a good sense of, depending on the characteristics of the problem, which one we're going to use. You're quite right.
We probably need to draw it to a close, unfortunately, but hopefully Flavio can stay briefly afterwards and chat informally about questions. Look, thank you so much, Flavio. I think these presentations really require the presenter to not just drag out their latest research paper, but actually distill a body of knowledge, which Flavio's done very well today. It's what we're trying to make is a distinctive trademark of these sessions. So thank you, Flavio, indeed.
Thank you.
Something to think of us fondly tonight or tomorrow or the weekend?
Oh, so I know I'm just finished a marathon, so I'm back at drinking now.
Excellent.
So it's good timing.
Look, a few things in terms of upcoming events. The next formally scheduled one is a full-day workshop on cost-benefit analysis on the 27th of August. There's a limited number of places still available. I've got some information on that here. It's basically designed for those who need to either do cost-benefit analyses or critically use and evaluate analyses done by others. So it's presented by 3 Griffith University academics who are experts in this field, so a good thing to consider attending. The program beyond that's a little bit formative. The committee is toying with having a sort of late afternoon, evening discussion on a topic, but more designed to create a forum whereby those who involve economics in Brisbane can get together and talk about an issue and perhaps network a bit, so sort of a lighter touch. We would hope to have another professional development seminar in October, and then in November, Deirdre McCloskey from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, whose trademark is teaching micro theory at Chicago University for a long time, but has subsequently broadened out into history of economic thought and economic history. She'll be presenting a seminar for the Society in November, but we'll get information out to all those who are members. For those who aren't members, we do encourage you to consider joining. I've got some forms here, just by chance. And also, if you want to be put on our mailing list for events, first priority one, and join. But if you don't wish to at this stage, then get it on our mailing list so we can email out to you, and you're informed of future events. Thank you again to Deloitte for hosting today. It's been very helpful indeed, and thank you to Flavio once again.